My name is Bethany, and I'm about to tell you something that will change how you see the people closest to you forever. What I discovered 3 months ago in that sterile hospital room didn't just end my marriage. It revealed a truth so disturbing that even now, as I sit in my Chicago apartment watching the snow fall against the window, I still can't fully process it. But let me start from the beginning, because context matters. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why I had to make the hardest decision of my life. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything started to unravel. The autumn leaves were painting Michigan Avenue in brilliant shades of amber and crimson, and I was rushing through the crisp morning air toward Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had been admitted the night before, after collapsing at her book club meeting. At 68, she was the kind of woman who prided herself on never missing a day of work, never admitting weakness, never asking for help. So when the call came from the emergency room, I knew it was serious. I'd been married to her son David for 4 years. 4 years of trying to win over a woman who seemed to view me as an intruder in her carefully constructed world. Eleanor Martinez was a retired high school principal who had raised David as a single mother after her husband died in a construction accident when David was 12. She was formidable, intelligent, and had very specific ideas about the kind of woman her son should have married. I wasn't it. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and floor wax, a combination that always made my stomach turn. I found David in the cardiac wing, pacing outside room 412 with his phone pressed to his ear. He was still in his business suit from the night before, his dark hair disheveled, his usually perfect appearance showing cracks of genuine worry. "Mom's stable," he said after ending his call, pulling me into a brief hug. "They're running more tests, but Dr. Peterson thinks it might have been a severe anxiety attack rather than a heart episode. Her blood pressure spiked, and she's been under a lot of stress lately." I wanted to ask what kind of stress, but David was already moving toward the room. Eleanor was awake, propped up against stark white pillows, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her silver hair was flat against her head, and her usually sharp eyes seemed clouded with exhaustion. "Bethany," she said when she saw me, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to come." "Of course I came, Eleanor. How are you feeling?" She attempted a weak smile. "Like I've been hit by a truck. But the nurses here are wonderful. Especially that young woman, Sarah. She's been so attentive." David squeezed his mother's hand. "The important thing is that you're okay." We were so scared. Over the next several hours, I watched my husband transform into someone I barely recognized. The David I knew was confident, sometimes arrogant, always in control. But seeing his mother vulnerable seemed to crack something inside him. He hovered constantly, questioning every decision the medical staff made, demanding second opinions, challenging medication choices. "Sir, your mother is receiving excellent care," Dr. Peterson assured him during one of his more heated moments. "Her vitals are improving steadily." "I'm not questioning your competence," David replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I just want to make sure she's getting the best possible treatment." I spent most of the day trying to smooth over the tension David was creating. I brought coffee for the nurses, apologized for his behavior, and tried to keep conversations light. Eleanor seemed to appreciate my efforts, actually smiling at me for the first time in years when I brought her ice chips and helped her adjust her pillows. By evening, the hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm. Eleanor was sleeping peacefully, her breathing steady and unlabored. David had finally agreed to go home and shower, promising to return first thing in the morning. I volunteered to stay the night, wanting to be there in case Eleanor needed anything. "You don't have to do that," David said as we stood in the hallway. "The nurses can handle everything." "I want to," I insisted. "She's family." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you. I know she doesn't always make it easy, but this means a lot." After David left, I settled into the uncomfortable chair beside Eleanor's bed. The room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. I had brought a book, but I couldn't concentrate on reading. Instead, I found myself studying Eleanor's face in the dim light, thinking about the woman I'd struggled to understand for so long. Around midnight, Eleanor stirred. "Bethany, are you still here?" "I'm here. Do you need anything? Water? More blankets?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Could you call Sarah?" I'm having some pain. I pressed the call button, and within minutes Sarah arrived. She was probably in her late 20s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm efficiency that made her perfect for night shift nursing. She checked Eleanor's vitals, adjusted her medication, and spoke in the gentle, reassuring tone that all the best nurses seem to master. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mrs. Martinez?" Sarah asked. "No, dear. You've been so wonderful. I don't know what I would have done without you." After Sarah left, Eleanor turned to me. "She reminds me of you at that age. Caring, attentive. I can see why David fell in love with you." It was the first genuinely kind thing she'd ever said to me, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor. That means more than you know. I haven't been fair to you," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was so protective of David after his father died. I thought no one would be good enough for my boy. But watching you today, seeing how you've handled everything, I realize I was wrong." We talked quietly for the next hour. Really talked. Perhaps for the first time since I'd known her. She told me stories about David's childhood, about the struggles of raising a son alone, about her fears and hopes for his future. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone. My insecurities about fitting into their family, my desire to have children, my dreams of building something meaningful with David. "You're a good woman, Bethany," she said, as her eyes grew heavy. "David is lucky to have you." I held her hand until she fell asleep, feeling like we'd finally found our way to each other. It was a moment of peace I'd treasure later, when everything else fell apart. But I had no idea that while I was bonding with Eleanor, David was at home sending messages that would destroy everything I thought I knew about the man I married. Messages that would force me to choose between protecting his mother's newfound trust in me and exposing the truth about who her son really was. The revelation was coming, and it would change all of our lives forever. The next morning arrived with the soft gray light of Chicago in late October. I had dozed fitfully in the hospital chair, waking every time Eleanor stirred or when the nurses came to check on her. By 7 a.m., she was awake and seemed remarkably better. Her color had returned, and her voice was stronger. "You look terrible," she said with a hint of her old sharpness, though her eyes were kind. "You should go home and rest." "I'm fine," I assured her, though I knew I probably looked as exhausted as I felt. "David should be here soon." As if summoned by his name, David appeared in the doorway carrying coffee and what looked like breakfast from the hospital cafeteria. He'd showered and changed into fresh clothes, but I could see the tension still etched in his face. "How is she?" he asked, kissing my cheek absently. "Much better. The night nurse said her vitals have been stable for hours." David moved to his mother's bedside, his demeanor shifting into the attentive son role he'd perfected over the years. "Mom, you scared us. How are you feeling?" "Like I could run a marathon," Eleanor replied dryly. "The doctors say I can probably go home tomorrow if my blood pressure stays stable." "That's wonderful news," I said, meaning it. The thought of Eleanor recovering fully lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Dr. Peterson arrived for morning rounds, bringing with him a team of residents, and the news that Eleanor's latest tests looked promising. "Your anxiety levels have decreased significantly, Mrs. Martinez. Whatever triggered the episode seems to be resolving. It was probably just the stress of the book club presidency," Eleanor said with a weak laugh. "Those literary discussions can get quite heated." David frowned. "Mom, you never mention being stressed about book club." "There are lots of things I don't mention to you, David. I'm a grown woman." I watched the exchange with interest. There was something in Eleanor's tone, a hint of irritation that seemed directed at David specifically. It was subtle, but after spending the night talking with her, I was beginning to pick up on nuances I'd missed before. "I'm going to grab some real coffee," David announced after Dr. Peterson left. "The hospital stuff tastes like motor oil. Mom, do you want anything?" "No, dear. Bethany's been taking wonderful care of me." After David left, Eleanor turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Bethany, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course. Is David happy? In your marriage, I mean. He seems different lately. More tense, more secretive." The question caught me off guard. "I think so. I mean, we have our challenges like any couple, but..." "What kind of challenges?" I hesitated. David and I had been having problems for months. but I'd never discussed them with Eleanor. Our communication had improved since her hospitalization, but I wasn't sure how much to reveal. He's been working longer hours, I said carefully. Sometimes he seems distant, but I assumed it was stress from the promotion at the firm. Eleanor nodded slowly. He's always been ambitious, sometimes too ambitious. After his father died, he became obsessed with success, with proving himself. I worried it would affect his relationships someday. Before I could respond, Sarah knocked and entered with Eleanor's morning medications. She was ending her shift and looked as fresh as if she'd just arrived, despite working all night. "How are you feeling this morning, Mrs. Martinez?" she asked, checking the IV and making notes on Eleanor's chart. "Much better, thanks to you. You've been an angel," Sarah smiled. "Just doing my job. Mr. Martinez seems very concerned about you. He's called the nurses' station several times since he left." "He called?" I asked, surprised. "When?" "Oh, multiple times throughout the night. Asking about your condition, wanting updates on medications, that sort of thing." Eleanor and I exchanged glances. David hadn't mentioned calling the hospital during the night. "That's thoughtful of him," Eleanor said, but I could hear the question in her voice. After Sarah left, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "Bethany, I'm probably overstepping, but I'm going to say this anyway. If David is having problems, personal problems, I want you to know that you can talk to me. I may not have been the most welcoming mother-in-law, but I care about you now, and I especially care about what makes you happy. Eleanor, I'm serious. David is my son, and I love him, but I'm not blind to his faults. He can be controlling, demanding. His father was the same way, and it put a strain on our marriage that we never fully resolved." I felt tears threatening again. "Thank you for saying that. It means everything." David returned with coffee and pastries, chatting animatedly about the beautiful fall weather and his plans to take a few days off work to help with Eleanor's recovery. He seemed almost manic in his cheerfulness, a stark contrast to his anxiety the day before. "I was thinking," he said, settling into the chair I'd vacated, "maybe we should hire a private nurse for when you come home, Mom. Just for the first few days." "That's not necessary," Eleanor replied firmly. "I'm not an invalid." "I know, but I'd feel better knowing someone qualified was checking on you." "David," I said no. There was an edge to Eleanor's voice that made David's smile falter. "Okay, but promise me you'll consider it. I just want what's best for you." "What's best for me is for my family to treat me like a capable adult, not a fragile china doll." The tension in the room was palpable. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to process the strange dynamics I was witnessing. Eleanor seemed to be seeing David differently, and I wasn't sure why. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to make sense of what I was feeling. Something was off about David's behavior, something beyond normal concern for his mother. The multiple phone calls to the nurses' station, the insistence on private care, the almost frantic cheerfulness. It all felt performative somehow. When I returned to the room, David was on his phone in the hallway, speaking in low, urgent tones. Eleanor was staring at the ceiling, looking troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Something's not right with David. He's acting like he's hiding something." "What do you mean?" "All these phone calls, the sudden interest in controlling my care. It feels like he's trying to manage something. Or someone." Before I could respond, David ended his call and came back into the room. "That was work," he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I need to go in for a few hours. There's a crisis with the Henderson account." "I thought you were taking time off," I said. "I am, but this can't wait. I'll be back this evening." After David left, Eleanor and I sat in companionable silence. I could tell she was processing something, working through thoughts she wasn't ready to share. Finally, she spoke. "Bethany, I want you to do something for me. If you ever feel like David is hiding something from you, anything, I want you to promise me you'll find out what it is. Don't ignore your instincts." "Eleanor, what's this about?" "I'm probably being paranoid, but I've seen this behavior before. The secretiveness, the need to control information. His father did the same thing when he was having his affair." The words hit me like a physical blow. "David isn't having an affair. How do you know?" I know him." Eleanor reached for my hand. I hope you're right. But if you're wrong, I want you to know that I'll support you. Whatever you decide to do. That evening, after David had returned from work and we'd finally headed home, I couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's words. As I watched David scroll through his phone over dinner, responding to messages with unusual intensity, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt completely secure in my marriage. That night, as David slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what I might discover if I started looking for answers. I had no idea that within 24 hours I would find something that would make Eleanor's suspicions seem naive in comparison. The truth was about to reveal itself, and it would be worse than anything I could have imagined. The next morning, Eleanor was discharged from Northwestern Memorial with a clean bill of health and strict instructions to reduce stress and follow up with her cardiologist. David had insisted on taking another day off work to help her settle back into her Lincoln Park apartment, and I was grateful for his attentiveness, even if it still felt somehow performative. Eleanor's apartment was a reflection of her personality, neat, organized, filled with books and photographs documenting decades of teaching and motherhood. David bustled around, checking windows, adjusting thermostats, and reorganizing medications with the kind of frenetic energy that suggested he was avoiding something. "David, sit down," Eleanor commanded from her favorite armchair. "You're making me nervous with all that pacing." "I just want to make sure everything's perfect for you," he replied. But he did sit, perching on the edge of the sofa like he might bolt at any moment. "Everything is perfect. Bethany and I are perfectly capable of managing without you hovering." I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch and trying to give them space to reconnect, but I could hear the underlying tension in their voices. Eleanor's tone carried a sharpness that hadn't been there before her hospitalization, while David seemed almost desperate to please. "I should check with the hospital," David said suddenly. "Make sure they have your insurance information correct for billing." "I'm sure they do," Eleanor replied. "You've called them enough times. I just want to be thorough." "David." Eleanor's voice carried the authority of her decades as a high school principal. "What is going on with you? You've been acting strange since yesterday." "I'm just worried about you, Mom." "This isn't worry. This is something else." I froze in the kitchen, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The air in the apartment felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. "I don't know what you mean," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't lie to me, David Martinez. I raised you. I know when you're hiding something." There was a long silence. I could hear the tick of Eleanor's antique clock and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "Fine," David said finally. "I may have been a little friendly with one of the nurses, but it's nothing, Mom. Just harmless flirting." My blood turned to ice. The sandwich I'd been making forgotten, I moved closer to the kitchen doorway, straining to hear. "Friendly how?" Eleanor's voice was dangerously quiet. I complimented her, asked about her life. She's young, attractive. I wasn't thinking clearly because I was so worried about you." "Which nurse?" "The blonde one. Sarah, I think her name was." Sarah. Sweet professional Sarah, who had been nothing but kind to Eleanor. Sarah, who had worked a double shift to make sure Eleanor was comfortable. Sarah, who couldn't have been more than 28 years old. "What exactly did you say to her?" Eleanor asked. "Nothing inappropriate. I just told her she was beautiful, asked if she was single, maybe suggested we get coffee sometime." "While your wife was sitting in my hospital room?" "Mom, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Eleanor's voice was rising. "Your wife stayed all night taking care of me while you were at home, and you used that time to hit on the nurse. I made a mistake, okay? I was stressed, not thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to get that poor girl's phone number." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt the world tilt sideways, reality shifting in ways I couldn't immediately process. "Mom, please." "Did you get her number, David?" "Yes, but..." "And did you text her?" Silence. "David, answer me." "Yes, I texted her. But Mom, it was just..." "What did you text her?" "I can't remember exactly." "You remember exactly. What did you text her?" I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Part of me wanted to run, to leave the apartment and never come back. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since Eleanor's hospitalization, needed to hear the truth. I told her she was beautiful, David said quietly. I said I couldn't stop thinking about her. I asked if she wanted to meet up. While your wife was caring for your mother. Yes. And what did she say? She was professional about it. Said she was flattered but couldn't get involved with patients' families. So you kept texting her. How did you? Because I know you don't take no for an answer. What else did you text her? The silence stretched so long I thought maybe David had left the room. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. I told her I was unhappy in my marriage, that my wife didn't understand me. I said I could make her happy if she gave me a chance. What else? Mom, please. What else did you text that poor girl? I may have sent some pictures. What kind of pictures? The kind I shouldn't have sent. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath was audible from the kitchen. You sent inappropriate pictures to a nurse while your wife was caring for your hospitalized mother? I wasn't thinking. You were thinking about yourself, like you always do. What did she say when you sent those pictures? She told me to stop. Said she would report me if I continued. And did you stop? Another long silence. Did you stop? I sent a few more messages. I was frustrated and What kind of messages? I called her some names. I said she was leading me on, that she was a tease. I might have said some things about what I wanted to do to her. Eleanor's voice, when she spoke again, was deadly quiet. You threatened a nurse who was caring for your mother. I didn't threaten her exactly. What exactly did you say? I said she didn't know what she was missing, that I could show her things her boyfriend couldn't, that maybe she needed to be taught a lesson about leading men on. The kitchen spun around me. I gripped the counter, fighting waves of nausea. This wasn't just infidelity. This was harassment. Predatory behavior toward a woman who had been nothing but professional. You sexually harassed a nurse, Eleanor said, her voice shaking with rage. A nurse who was caring for your sick mother while your wife held my hand all night. Mom, I'm sorry. You're sorry? You're sorry that you cheated on your wife, harassed a young woman, and did it all while hiding behind your concern for my health? I made a mistake. This wasn't a mistake, David. This was a choice. Multiple choices. You chose to betray your wife. You chose to harass a woman who was doing her job. You chose to use my illness as cover for your behavior. I heard David stand up, his voice becoming defensive. You're overreacting, Mom. It's not like I actually did anything with her. Overreacting? Eleanor's voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard before. Overreacting? You think I'm overreacting to discovering that my son is the kind of man who preys on women in the workplace? I wasn't preying on anyone. You were harassing a nurse, David. A nurse who was caring for your mother. What would you call that? I was going through a rough time. We're all going through rough times. That doesn't give you permission to treat women like objects for your entertainment. The argument continued, but I couldn't focus on the words anymore. All I could think about was Sarah's kind face, her gentle hands adjusting Eleanor's pillows, her professional smile as she'd answered David's questions about Eleanor's condition. She'd been doing her job, caring for a sick woman, and David had turned it into an opportunity to pursue his own selfish desires. I thought about the previous night, when Eleanor had told me I was a good woman, when she'd said David was lucky to have me. I thought about the trust we'd built, the connection we'd finally found, and I realized that Eleanor needed to know the truth, not just about David's infidelity, but about the kind of man her son really was. But I also realized that I needed proof, because as devastating as this conversation was, I knew David would deny it, minimize it, find ways to make it seem less serious than it was. And I knew that Eleanor, despite her anger, might eventually forgive him if she didn't see the evidence herself. I needed to see those text messages. I needed to know exactly what kind of man I'd married, and I had a feeling that what I would find would be even worse than what David had just admitted. That evening, David and I drove home in silence through the Chicago streets. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from fireplaces and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. Under normal circumstances, it was my favorite time of year, the season of cozy evenings and warm drinks, of planning for the holidays and looking forward to winter's quiet beauty. But nothing about this evening was normal. David kept glancing at me as he drove, his hands tight on the steering wheel. I stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past, trying to process what I'd witnessed in Eleanor's apartment. The argument had ended with David storming out, claiming his mother was completely overreacting, and that I would understand better than she did. But I didn't understand. I understood less than I had that morning. Back in our Lincoln Park condo, David immediately poured himself a scotch and settled into his favorite chair. "I need to explain about this afternoon," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Okay," I said, sitting across from him on the sofa. "Explain." Mom took everything out of context. She made it sound much worse than it was. What's the context that makes sexually harassing a nurse sound better? David's face darkened. I didn't sexually harass anyone. I complimented an attractive woman and asked her out. When she said no, I may have been a little persistent, but that's not harassment. You sent her inappropriate pictures, David. I sent her one picture. One. And it wasn't even that explicit. One picture of what? Does it matter? She overreacted just like Mom did. I studied my husband's face. The man I'd shared a bed with for 4 years. Planned a future with. Imagined having children with. What did you say to her after she told you to stop? I don't remember exactly. I was frustrated. Try to remember. Bethany, this is ridiculous. You're acting like I committed a crime. What did you say to her, David? He took a long sip of his scotch. I may have said some things I shouldn't have. But I was under stress, worried about Mom, and this girl was sending mixed signals. What mixed signals? She was being friendly, asking about my life, complimenting my concern for Mom. I thought she was interested. She was doing her job. She was flirting. She was being professional. You weren't there, Bethany. You don't know what it was like. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You're right. I wasn't there. I was in your mother's hospital room, holding her hand while she slept. Where were you supposed to be? I was worried. You were at home, sending pictures to a nurse who was caring for your mother. One picture! David, listen to yourself. You're defending sending inappropriate pictures to a woman who told you no. I'm not defending anything. I'm trying to explain that everyone is blowing this out of proportion. Everyone? Who else knows about this? David's face went pale. I didn't mean everyone. I meant you and Mom. Who else knows, David? No one. It's not that big a deal. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. From our 8th floor apartment, I could see the lights of Northwestern Memorial Hospital in the distance. I want to see the messages. What? I want to see what you sent to Sarah. Bethany, that's not... I want to see them. I deleted them. All of them? Yes, all of them. I realized I'd made a mistake, so I deleted them. When? When? When did you delete them? This morning, before we went to pick up Mom. I turned to face him. Show me your phone. My phone? Show me your phone, David. I don't think that's necessary. Show me your phone or I'm calling Eleanor right now and telling her you're lying about deleting the messages. Something flickered across David's face. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Fine, he said, pulling out his phone. But I'm telling you, I deleted them. He handed me the phone and I opened his text messages. Sarah's name wasn't in his recent conversations, but I knew that didn't mean anything. I scrolled through his other messages, looking for anything that might give me insight into who my husband really was. What I found made my blood run cold. There were messages to other women. Multiple women. A bartender from a restaurant we'd been to last month. A woman from his gym. A receptionist at his law firm. All of them followed similar patterns. Compliments that escalated to sexual comments. Requests for meetings. And when rejected, increasingly angry and vulgar responses. David, I said, my voice shaking. What is this? He looked at his phone screen and his face went white. Those are from a long time ago. This one is from last week. Bethany, let me explain. And this one is from 3 days ago. I can explain all of this. While I was sleeping in a hospital chair, you were sending messages to multiple women? It's not what you think. What do I think, David? Tell me what I think. He set down his scotch and stood up, moving toward me. You think I'm cheating on you. Are you? No. I've never physically cheated on you. Physically, I've never touched another woman. But you've been messaging them, harassing them. sending them pictures. I've been going through something. I don't know what's wrong with me. How long? How long what? How long have you been messaging other women? David sat back down, putting his head in his hands. I don't know. Maybe a year. A year. Maybe longer. How much longer? Since we got married. The words hit me like a physical blow. For 4 years, while I'd been building a life with this man, trusting him, loving him, he'd been pursuing other women. While I'd been trying to win over his mother, he'd been messaging bartenders and receptionists. While I'd been dreaming of our future children, he'd been sending inappropriate pictures to strangers. I need to see the messages to Sarah, I said quietly. I told you. I deleted them. No, you didn't. Bethany, you didn't delete them because you're not sorry. You're only sorry you got caught. I scrolled through his phone, looking for any trace of Sarah's contact information. Finally, I found it. Not deleted, but hidden in a folder labeled Work Contacts. The messages were all there, every single one, and they were worse than David had admitted. The first few were seemingly innocent, compliments about her professionalism, questions about her background, but they quickly escalated. Photos of David shirtless, followed by more explicit images. When Sarah politely declined his advances, the messages became vulgar and threatening. He called her names I won't repeat, made graphic comments about what he wanted to do to her, and when she threatened to report him, he'd responded with messages that could only be interpreted as intimidation. You threatened her job, I said, my voice hollow. I was angry. You told her you could get her fired. I was bluffing. You told her you knew people in hospital administration. I was just trying to... You were trying to scare her into silence. I kept reading, my horror growing with each message. This wasn't just infidelity or harassment. This was predatory behavior. David had used his position, his connections, his power to try to coerce a young woman who was simply doing her job. I'm going to be sick, I said, rushing to the bathroom. When I came back, David was pouring another drink. Look, I know this looks bad. It doesn't look bad, David. It is bad. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling. I can get help. You sexually harassed a nurse while your mother was in the hospital. I made some mistakes. You made threats against a woman who was caring for your mother. I was emotionally compromised. You used your mother's illness as an opportunity to prey on vulnerable women. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. I looked at this man I'd married, really looked at him, and realized I'd never known him at all. The David I'd fallen in love with was a fiction, a carefully constructed facade hiding someone I couldn't even recognize. I'm leaving, I said. Bethany, please. I'm going to Eleanor's. You can't tell her about this. I'm not going to tell her. I'm going to show her. You can't do that. It would destroy her. You should have thought of that before you sent those messages. Please, Bethany. I'm begging you. Don't destroy my relationship with my mother. I walked to the bedroom and started packing a bag. You destroyed it yourself. She's just recovered from a major health scare. This could send her back to the hospital. She's stronger than you think. Please. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll change. You'll what? You'll stop harassing women? You'll stop threatening people? You'll stop using your mother's illness as cover for your behavior? Yes, all of that. I'll be the husband you deserve. I stopped packing and turned to face him. The husband I deserve wouldn't have done any of this in the first place. Everyone makes mistakes. This isn't a mistake, David. This is a pattern. 4 years of lies, 4 years of betrayal, 4 years of you pretending to be someone you're not. I love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of me. You love having a wife who makes you look respectable while you message other women behind my back. I finished packing and headed for the door. David followed me, his voice becoming increasingly desperate. If you show those messages to my mother, I'll never forgive you. I stopped at the door and turned back to him. Good. Because I'll never forgive you either. Bethany, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about our marriage, our future. Our future? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. David, we don't have a future. We never did. Because the man I thought I was building a future with doesn't exist. I can change. You've had 4 years to change. You've had 4 years to be honest with me, to respect me, to honor our marriage vows. Instead, you've spent 4 years lying to my face while pursuing other women. It never meant anything. It meant everything. It meant that every time you said you loved me, you were lying. Every time you made love to me, you were thinking about someone else. Every time I trusted you, you were betraying that trust. I opened the door, then paused. And David, the worst part isn't even what you did to me. The worst part is what you did to Sarah, what you did to all those women. You used your power, your connections, your position to intimidate and threaten women who couldn't fight back. That's not a mistake. That's predatory behavior. I never touched anyone. You didn't have to. You threatened their livelihoods, their sense of safety, their ability to do their jobs without harassment. You made them afraid. You were just what? Lonely? Misunderstood? Going through a rough patch? David, there's no excuse for what you did. None. I walked out of our apartment and into the Chicago night, leaving behind 4 years of marriage and the man I'd thought I knew. The elevator ride down felt like falling through space, each floor marking another layer of illusion stripped away. 20 minutes later, I was standing outside Eleanor's apartment building, holding David's phone and trying to gather the courage to destroy a mother's faith in her son. Eleanor answered the door in her robe, her face immediately creasing with concern. Bethany, what's wrong? Is David... David's fine, I said. But I need to show you something. And she led me to her living room, the same space where hours earlier I'd discovered the truth about my marriage. What is it, dear? I sat beside her on the sofa and handed her the phone. I need you to read David's messages to Sarah. I don't understand. David lied to you today. About what he said to Sarah, about how many messages he sent, about everything. I need you to see the truth. Eleanor took the phone with trembling hands. As she read, I watched her face change, confusion giving way to horror, disappointment, and finally, a deep sadness that seemed to age her before my eyes. Oh, David, she whispered after reading several messages. What have you become? She continued reading, her face growing paler with each message. When she reached the threats, the intimidation, the graphic descriptions of what David wanted to do to Sarah, she set the phone down and covered her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, Eleanor, I said softly. I'm sorry you had to see this. How long? She asked, her voice muffled. 4 years, since we got married. Maybe longer. Other women? Many others. Bartenders, women from his gym, co-workers. Always the same pattern. Pursuit, escalation, and when they say no, threats and intimidation. Eleanor uncovered her face, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. I failed him. No, I said firmly. You didn't fail him. You raised him to know right from wrong. These were his choices. I knew his father had problems with women, but I hoped David would be different. This isn't your fault, Eleanor. Isn't it? I made excuses for his father's behavior for years. I taught David that men could get away with treating women badly as long as they apologized afterward. You taught David to be respectful and kind. I've seen the man you raised. This other person. This predator. That's not who you created. Eleanor picked up the phone again, scrolling through more messages. These poor women. They were just trying to do their jobs, live their lives, and he turned them into objects for his entertainment. I know. Sarah was so kind to me. She worked extra hours to make sure I was comfortable. And this is how my son repaid her kindness. I'm going to report him, I said quietly. To the hospital, to the bar association, to anyone who will listen. Women need to be protected from him. Eleanor nodded slowly. You're right. You absolutely should. I wanted you to know first, before you heard it from anyone else. Thank you for that. And Bethany? Yes? I want you to know that whatever you decide to do, divorce, prosecution, whatever, I will support you completely. You're not losing a mother-in-law tonight. You're gaining an ally. I felt tears begin to fall, but for the first time in hours, they weren't entirely tears of sadness. Thank you. I mean it. David is my son, and I love him. But what he's done is unforgivable. Those women deserved better. You deserved better. We sat together in the quiet apartment, two women processing the destruction that one man's choices had wrought. Outside, Chicago sparkled in the darkness. Millions of people living their lives, most of them trying to be decent, most of them succeeding. "What will you do now?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know. File for divorce, certainly. Report him to the authorities. Try to rebuild my life. You're strong enough to do all of that." "I hope so. I know so. You stayed with me all night in that hospital, taking care of me when my own son was at home betraying you. You have a good heart, Bethany. Don't let David's cruelty change that." As I prepared to leave Eleanor's apartment that night, I realized that while I'd lost a husband, I'd gained something precious. The respect and love of a woman I'd always wanted to know better, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand up for what was right, even when it cost me everything I thought I wanted. David had called me overreacting when I confronted him about his behavior. But there was no overreaction to predatory behavior, no overreaction to harassment, no overreaction to a man who used his power to intimidate women who couldn't fight back. There was only the truth, and the courage to face it. And sometimes, the truth was enough to set you free. 3 months later, as I sat in my new apartment watching the snow fall, I could say with certainty that leaving David was the best decision I'd ever made. The divorce had been ugly. The reports to various authorities had been difficult. But I'd never regretted choosing truth over comfort, justice over convenience. Eleanor and I had dinner every Sunday now, two women who'd found each other in the wreckage of one man's selfishness. Sarah had been transferred to a different unit at the hospital and had agreed to participate in the investigation into David's behavior. Several other women had come forward with their own stories of harassment. David was facing professional sanctions and had been required to undergo counseling as part of his plea agreement. His law firm had quietly asked him to resign. I'd learned that sometimes the people we love most are capable of betraying us in ways we never imagined. But I'd also learned that we're stronger than we know, that the truth is always worth pursuing, and that standing up for what's right, even when it costs us everything, is the only way to live with ourselves. The revelation I'd promised at the beginning had finally come full circle. I'd discovered that the man I married was a predator, that the mother-in-law I'd struggled to please had become my greatest ally, and that sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives are also the most liberating. David had accused me of overreacting, but there's no overreaction to discovering the truth about someone you love. There's only the choice between continuing to live a lie or having the courage to face reality. I chose reality, and for the first time in 4 years, I could sleep peacefully at night, knowing that the woman looking back at me in the mirror was someone I could respect.